Hello everybody, this is SB, also known as Mr. Google, and today I'm about to bring you guys a new online PvP match playing 1 versus 1 using the EU General Cutting Edge with experimental weapons versus my opponent, which is using the Thousand Suns General, which is the a.k.a. Tank General. I've equipped a few of the easy cheap perks for the lower levels after I unlocked this general for 5600 points. In this video you will see big tank wars fights, a lot of overlord tanks versus the cutting edge tanks of this specific general with giant lasers and such. So stay tuned if you'd like to see some heavy tank battles going on during an online PvP match. In this fight it takes me quite some time before I can finally reach my opponent's base. Sometimes I think I am easily winning, but in fact I am really not, just because the Thousand Suns General has very strong tanks. The Overlord tanks, for example, I am not sure if the Thousand Suns General has extra upgrades or something, but at a certain point I have so many big giant laser tanks with upgrades and all the good stuff you could imagine, and he still managed to bring down a massive army with far less resources than I am able to get during this match. So hold on, wait and see, and I'll show you guys how I eventually get to win the match. We're taking heavy losses on both sides, especially my side at the beginning. So this is the typical fight of underestimating your opponent, because at a certain point I have a lot of map control. He isn't really coming out. I would call him something like a turtle player. He's not scouting very well, so I might have underestimated my opponent a little bit. You will find out why. For now I opened with the command center again just to get the power. It's just a little bit more expensive than a power plant, but in the early game that could be the difference for a good or not so good rush or something like that, but I really mostly tend to just build the command center first, then build a barracks or the war factory. I'm not always doing the same thing. It really depends on the opponent. For example, the Thousand Suns General, he mainly has tanks and perhaps also some aircraft, but mainly tanks. It's the tank general basically. And my general does have quite some weaknesses. I really noticed it very well in the early game. I did some testing before versus the computer and such, and if you build a normal barracks, the only troopers you get, the only infantry, are the shock troopers. Shock troopers are very good, but they cannot fire in the air. The same goes for your tier 1 tanks. They cannot shoot in the air. You have to tire up your tech buildings just to prevent someone to be able to crush down your base with a few helicopters or something. So for this cutting edge general it has quite some powers, but it has a fairly noticeable disadvantage, and in my opinion you only have one tank you can build where you have to tech up for a little bit, and besides anti-air it isn't all that useful. So you guys should really try to scout out your opponent if he's trying to take advantage of this weak spot. As you probably have seen, at this place I also decided to build a barracks. Barracks are fairly cheap. I decided to drive one of my dozers up there, so that if he would decide to rush in with all the units he has, I can quickly build a few of the shock trooper infantry. Shock trooper infantry are more expensive than regular recon squads, but their mainly advantage is that they have more firepower. You can upgrade them better. They can have the ability, once you upgrade it, to be able to have some speed boost, some armor boost, and the ability to fire while moving for a short period of time. It is a fairly good move. It's a pity that you have to upgrade first, but it isn't all that expensive. You could, for example, use it to get your infantry quicker at a certain place. You could use it when you're running around, taking cover around his buildings, for example, while someone of his units is trying to follow you. You have the ability to shoot while moving, which could help you a fairly little bit, or just for taking some suppressive fire while walking around his base defenses, for example. So it works fairly well. It's not all that expensive, so I could basically recommend to use that upgrade, for example. Another thing which is very cool about this general is in the later game, once you build a tech lab and a war factory, you can already build the pretty powerful tanks, the giant laser beam tanks. They also have a micro functionality once you upgrade them, and you have the ability to upgrade them just like any other vehicle and any other EU faction at the advanced tech lab. I really suggest you guys also build the advanced tech lab once you get it, just because it will upgrade all your vehicles in your whole army, so it adds up quite a bit. At this point I already expanded to take over a few oil derricks. I spotted that my opponent has one oil derrick, and I also sent one of my extra built dozers to the right side, a little bit in the middle of the map. You can see the green dot over there, just to build a supply stash later on when I have about 2000 gold in game. I think it's about that, or a little bit less. So if my opponent, for example, decides to go over there, I can see him coming as well. But for now I don't have the credits yet, so I don't build it instantly. At this point it looks to me that I have more map control than my opponent, for example, so I decide to also keep on building some infantry, and while expanding my base I decide to pump out units as long as I can, as much as I can, because I am not really sure what my opponent is doing. The one thing I do know is that it's the tank general, so he couldn't possibly go rush in with infantry because he doesn't have the basic infantry and stuff. So what I am expecting is a giant army of overlords, and I think I had it spot on with my guess. You'll see that later on. Also, another tip I could give you guys is to not place all your units in the middle of your base, because each general has some sort of a spy plane or a functionality, something like that. I can speak for myself because I'm also doing that. Most of the players tend to keep their units near or in their base, so if you scout there, there's a higher possibility of you being able to scout his tanks or his infantry, or basically knowing what he's up to. So I just destroyed his oil derrick with a few of their infantry units. At this moment I know I cannot win with just this infantry, and that's not the purpose of this. The purpose is scouting, and I just scouted his expansion, so that's worth something. And I also destroy a few of his units. He pulls away his harvesters for a little bit. As you can see, he has a few overlords tanks already, so I really had to focus on getting more income in this game, so I could pump out more tanks with more than one war factory for an indefinite amount of time. That's my purpose, at least for now. I also decide to keep a few of the infantry over there, try to pick off some more units, just try to harass him, kill more units, keep him busy, make him spend money. And I also figured out on my radar that he is trying to attack my oil derricks to the left, which I already took over, and I will take them over later on again. But he tends to do some things I really didn't expect. That's basically the reason why I decided to make a commentary about this specific game, just because I think this is more entertaining when you have an opponent who's also playing way different than you would probably expect. At least that's my opinion about my opponent, and you'll see why later on. For now I decided to let my opponent take over those oil derricks for now, so I didn't have to expose my infantry barracks or my trick up my sleeve, as you can say, probably. Well, as said before, he was building overlord tanks, and I just found out he already had 3 or 4 of them with a few other tanks, so I decided to start building basic tanks and later on build the giant laser tanks, which are only usable when you play the experimental weapons general. Another thing I really like to do is to send a cheap dozer. They're about $150 in-game currency. What I'll do is I'll send them to supply stashes, and when I have the money to spare, I will build an extra supply center just to get extra money. The best money, you get the best money when you're building supply centers. Oil derricks are nice, but they're a little bit cost inefficient. The reason why I do take over oil derricks first is because they are cheaper. They are done earlier, so if you build an oil derrick, it's ready much faster than building a supply center, and the ability to gain money easier. You don't have to, for example, spend 2,000 on the supply center and then 450 per extra helicopter taking supplies. For the same amount of money you can take over about 3 oil derricks for 1 complete supply center. So that's the reason why I take over oil derricks first. As you can see, my opponent just dropped some stealth turrets. I cannot shoot them down, but I can see them. I think it is a bug, because normally I shouldn't be able to see them. I would normally first have to use a unit which can see stealth, or have a base defense which can see stealth. So I decide to go for the second option, build a base defense over there so I can take out his stealth. Another thing about this general which is unique is his player power. His player power has 3 ranks. Rank 1 being just an EMP blast. You shut down his enemy units for a while. Rank 2 is the same thing, but you add damage. And rank 3 is more damage and a longer EMP effect. With arsenal perks switching, you could change around these perks, so you could have any EU faction player power instead of that one. But you should watch my other video about the premium perks and arsenal and units description overview. I will place down a link in the description for that video if you would really like to come back to that video to check that out. For now my economy starts to increase quite a bit. I decide to build more supply centers, and I'll try to keep on indefinitely build tanks out of my war factory, so there is not a single moment where I'm not able to build a tank from my war factory because I don't have enough money. I think I have about 1, 2, 3, 4 or 5 supply centers. Later on, all with 3 harvesters, the flying harvesters. Just because it's a little bugged, I just built another turret over there so I can take out his turrets, which expose my base. At this point I have lots of money to spend. I don't have quite a lot of tanks yet. I know I might be a little bit behind in numbers and possibly also with the scouting, but because I have quite some expansions and my opponent does not, I know that I have way more money to spend. So at this point I was thinking, oh well, I should be okay. He cannot have quite as much money as I have, so I shouldn't be too scared at this point about losing this game. Looking back now, I should have built more tanks at this point, 13 minutes into the game, than just expanding so much, just because he could potentially have way more firepower than me at this point. But yes, looking back, you'll learn from yourself, you'll learn from your mistakes and so on. But for now I do have a lot of money to spend. It's coming in very quickly. You can see that on top of my radar to the left side. Another thing I really like to explain is to the right of my radar you can see the avatar of the Cutting Edge General with all his player powers. Right on top of that you can see the groupings. For example, the first place is when you mark a building, a structure or a group of units and you press Ctrl+1. you'll group them to the 1 key. So if you press 1, you instantly have access from anywhere on the map to build something or to select your units and then be able to command them to move somewhere. Well, another advantage of me at this point is that my tanks are way faster than his overlords. He wasn't really defending this very good, so my tanks made quick work of him, destroying his oil derricks, destroying a little bit more of his economy. So he should only have about 2 supply stashes right now, and supply stashes also run out of money, so just so you know, it's not indefinitely, it has limited resources. At this point my opponent decides to come in, use one of his player powers on my tanks, or at least he tried to. I think I went out just quick enough. Another thing I did is use my EMP on his overlords. They're very slow, they cannot really move out of my player powers. If I had a few air bomb, I would really use that on his group of overlords over there, just because I just used my EMP, which will give me enough time to make quick work of his overlords. And at this point I'm doing all in my powers to pump out units as much as I can, because he might be able to be on his way to my base. The few tanks I just used are on the way back to my base. I decide to lure him out, try to get him to meet my tanks. I have a few of the special laser tanks right over there. As you can see, he's still pursuing, so I decide to move back a little bit more, see if he falls for the bait. And at this moment I was thinking, oh well, he has a few overlord tanks, I have way more units than him, this should be easy. Well, I was a little bit wrong about this, you will see. He has about, let's count them. How many are those? I can see about 10, maybe more overlord tanks, and look at how many units I have at this point. While attacking him over here, I also keep on building more tanks, just to be sure to spend my money, because I have way too much. I should build a 3rd war factory, which I will do later on, but take a closer look. Those giant lasers are from the cutting edge special tanks. They cost about 1200 in-game currency per tank, and you can upgrade them with advanced tech, and you can upgrade them to have a microing ability, which is basically an ability which you can use after microing one of the tanks to select a laser beam. You use it on a tank, and after a few seconds it does damage over time, and after the damage over time it will do AoE damage or something like that. Well, look at his overlords. My tanks are fairly expensive, but they shoot fairly slow, and his overlord tanks also have the Gatling cannons and such on top of them. So at this point I'm doing all in my power just to take out the few overlord tanks which shirked into my base. At this point I really thought, oh well, take a minute, spam your units, just build as much as you can, possibly make your 3rd war factory, because I would really need it. You just saw a few overlord tanks crushing my whole army. Yes, the overlords, they are fairly powerful. They are the most expensive unit in game, as far as I know, for now. And yes, they should be powerful, because they are slow, they have disadvantages as well, because of their price, for example. But I really didn't expect him to bring down my whole army, so it was basically a very close call. If his overlord tanks were way faster, he probably would have been able to just run into my base. If he would have taken out my war factories, I was actually going to lose this fight. So at this point I'm doing all in my powers to make quick work of him, build as much units as I can, as quick as I can, because as you can see at this point he is sending about 5 more already. And my tanks are, yeah, I think they nerfed the heavy assault laser 1 or 2 patches ago before I got the chance to use them, so they're not really that powerful anymore. I think they were more powerful as of now, but for now it's not really my thing, I think. They are powerful, but they're also very expensive, way too slow. Another thing which isn't very helpful is if your opponent, for example, has a lot of infantry. with quick firing abilities. What happens is, if you come close, the laser tanks will focus fire on one group of infantry, for example, and then it takes a few seconds or maybe 2 or 3 seconds before they can fire again. So a group of infantry, a very big group of infantry, costing way less than your big expensive laser tanks, could possibly take down your whole massive army of expensive tanks fairly easily. Just because he is using the tank general, he is not able to do that, so that's why I decided to build mainly also tanks, because his overlord tanks are pretty effective versus my infantry. Basically it renders my infantry units useless. I don't have a lot of infantry for this general anyway, so I don't really miss out on this, but I tend to go for a giant economy and just try to overwhelm my opponent. That's basically everything I can do in my powers at this point for now. So I decide to build a third war factory to keep up building units. I know I am gaining more money than my opponent, so I should be able to outlast him with the money I have at this point. Well, another great thing about the EU is that when you reach general level 2 in-game, which is the yellow bar, you get the player power to repair your units. It repairs your units over time and it's fairly powerful. At this point I had quite an army. I know he had about 3 overlord tanks, so I decided to send them out because a new army is already building and it's gaining pretty fast, so I decided to run in, make work of his overlord tanks and try to destroy more of his buildings, and just keeping him busy, making me spend all his money so I can take advantage of the more money I am earning at this point. And I will find out that it is working because he cannot keep up. So I decide to just leave my units over there at the outside of his base and just to hold him off a little bit longer. Just don't care much about the few units left over there. I also take over the lost oil derricks just to be sure, and if you take over more buildings, for example, you also get more points at the end of the match, so that's not a good reason to take over oil derricks. I think unit counts and how much you build, how much you destroyed, all factors in at your endgame bonus, which you need to purchase new generals. For those who wanted to see GLA generals earlier than the new EU general, just hold on. I also unlocked the Junkyard General. You might have seen that in the beginning of my video already. I unlocked the Junkyard General for the GLA because he's more unique than the other ones I could choose. So I chose that one just to show you guys the best variety possible when unlocking a new general. So as said before, I was building tanks with 3 war factories. It works fairly well because you can now build 3 tanks at the same time if you have enough money. So that's what I did. I built Crusader tanks and I built the heavy assault laser tanks. I destroyed almost all of his units. My opponent drops his nuclear bomb and his player power is over there, destroying half of my base, including my command center. So at this point you can see how much expansions I have, and probably that will affect his choice in a little bit, as you will see fairly soon. This is about the last minute of the gameplay, so I will zerk in. At this point I decide to build a few more buildings I was missing out on here over there, but looking back now, I also should have been able to build my super weapon at this time already, maybe giving me some more firepower than just my opponent at this point, but it doesn't really matter. I am winning at this point. I have way more tanks than his overlords now, so that will work wonders. I rush in, they're not very rushy, they're very slow, but I'll go to his base. As said before, he destroyed my command center, so he can see all of the green on his minimap, so he knows I have a big advantage. For him it's impossible to win, so he decides to surrender and I go for the victory. So thank you for watching, I'll hope to see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please take your time to leave a like down below or a comment. I will always answer comments. So far I've answered every single comment. Please let me know what you'd like to see for the future. My next video is probably going to be about the GLA faction using the Junkyard General with the battle boss and his scrap abilities.